Good evening, and welcome to Nox Historia. Tonight, we travel to the world of a winter crossing of the Alps. Let your bodies settle now, wherever you happen to be lying. Let the blankets take your weight. There is nowhere to be and nothing to do but listen, and even that is optional. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Let your breath slow on its own, without being asked to. We are going back to the 12th century of the Christian era, to a stretch of mountains that separates the warm lowlands of Italy from the cooler lands of France and the countries beyond, somewhere close to the year 1120, a time before printing, before the compass was common at sea, when a letter sent from Canterbury to Rome might arrive 2 months after they sent it, if it arrived at all, and a person who wanted to see the Pope or visit the tomb of an apostle or simply be somewhere else for a while had only one real way to do it. They walked. Here is something most people never learn about the world before maps as we know them existed. There was no single road called the Via Francigena marked on any sign, because there were no signs to mark it with. There was no one path laid down once and fixed forever. There was a habit of travel, worn into the ground over centuries by feet and cartwheels and the hooves of pack mules, threading through valleys and over passes because that was simply where the land allowed a person to go. And one of those places, high in the mountains ahead of you tonight, has had people crossing it for so long that the Romans built a temple there to their king of gods 1,000 years before anyone had ever spoken the word pilgrim. You do not need to remember any of this. If you happen to fall asleep before we reach the top of the mountain or before we reach the bottom again on the far side, that is exactly what this is for. So let the evening begin gently, not with the pass itself, not yet, with the valley below it, where the road still feels almost easy and the light is doing that particular thing it does in the mountains just before dark. You are walking in your mind along the floor of a long valley in the last hour of a short winter afternoon. This is the valley the old geographers once called Vallis Auguspana, the Valley of Augusta. Today, people simply call it the Aosta Valley, a deep groove cut between mountain ranges, running roughly east to west, with the high wall of the Alps closing off its far end like a door not yet opened. Behind you, somewhere back down the valley, lie the vineyards and market towns of Piedmont, and beyond them the wide plain of Lombardy. Ahead of you, unseen from here, folded into cloud and distance, is the pass you are traveling toward. The light at this hour turns amber, low and sideways, in the way it does only in mountain valleys in winter, when the sun is already dropped behind one ridge, while the sky above the opposite ridge still glows soft gold. Smoke rises straight up from a scatter of stone roofs ahead of you, because there is no wind this evening, a small kindness. Somewhere further on, past the last true town, the valley will narrow, and the road will begin to climb, and the world will turn white and quiet and slow, but not yet. Here, the ground underfoot is still brown, and the road is still wide enough for 2 loaded mules to pass one another without either stepping into the frost gathering at its edge. You can feel more than see that this is a road people have used for a long time. It has that particular quality of a road with an old habit behind it, sunk slightly below the level of the fields on either side, smoothed by centuries of feet rather than built by any one hand in any one year. Here and there, up on the hillsides above the valley floor, a stone watchtower catches the last of the light before anything else does, keeping half an eye on the road below, the way it has for generations, without much needing to be asked. You are not the only traveler on this road tonight, and that is worth sitting with for a moment, because it says something true about this whole stretch of history. Anyone walking through the Aosta Valley in the 12th century walked in company, whether they wanted to or not, because a road like this one was never built for only one kind of person. There are pilgrims around you, some walking toward Rome for reasons people had been walking there for 200 years, to stand at the tomb of an apostle, to be forgiven for something specific, to fulfill a vow made during an illness or a storm at sea, or because a bishop or a court had set the journey as a penance and required proof that it was completed. A few of these pilgrims will carry on past Rome, further south and east toward the port towns, and from there by ship toward Jerusalem, though that is a longer story for another night. Others are walking the opposite direction, back north, having already knelt at the altar they set out to find, going home lighter in one sense and heavier in another, carrying small lead badges and accounts of the journey they will tell for the rest of their lives. There are merchants on this road too, and this matters more than it might first seem. It was never only a pilgrim's road. It carried wool down from England and Flanders into Italy, and carried the goods of the Italian cities back north again, cloth, dyes, and further along the whole network of routes, the spices and silks that had themselves already crossed at least one sea to reach the Mediterranean ports. A merchant crossing this pass in winter was not doing it for love of the scenery. He was doing it because the goods in his packs were worth more in Flanders in February than they would be arriving in April, and a closed pass for a certain kind of trader meant a closed market and a lost season. There are clergy on this road too, canons and monks traveling between abbeys with letters of introduction, occasionally carrying a relic being moved from one church to another for safekeeping or for honor. There are messengers riding when they can afford a horse and its feed, walking when they cannot, carrying news between courts and monasteries that will travel no faster than the person carrying it in his own 2 legs. Most of these travelers move on foot, whatever their business, because a horse is a costly thing to feed on a road with so little level pasture, and a mule earns its keep carrying goods rather than a rider. And there are the ordinary reasons people have always traveled, the ones that survive least well in any record. A daughter going to be married into a household 2 valleys over, a Mason walking toward the next great church that needs building, a debt owed to a cousin in a town further along the road. Picture now one particular pilgrim's load, since it will help this road feel real rather than distant. You are dressed for distance rather than for looks. A long wool tunic, layered because wool is the one material this century can rely on for warmth, and it keeps some of its usefulness even when wet, which matters more the higher this road climbs. Over that, a heavier cloak and a broad hat, useful for keeping low winter sun and rain out of the eyes on the flatter stretches, though here, closer to the mountains, it does most of its work simply holding a little warmth around the neck and ears. In one hand, a staff, roughly shoulder height, worn smooth where a palm has gripped it for weeks. It is not only for walking. It steadies a foot on uneven ground. It fends off a farm dog trotting out to bark at a stranger. It can be planted and leaned on at the end of a long day's climb. By this point in the 12th century, the staff and the bag that travels with it, called a scrip, carried at the hip on a strap, have become so bound up with the whole idea of pilgrimage that some churches have begun blessing them formally before a traveler set out, handing them across the altar like tools for a particular kind of work, which in a sense they were. The scrip itself holds very little. Bread, when there is bread to carry, a flint, a small knife, perhaps a written letter identifying the traveler and stating their purpose and destination, useful at a monastery gate or a town wall where a stranger needs some reason to be let in after dark. And sewn into a hem or seam, out of sight, a coin or two, not loose in a purse where a light-fingered stranger at a crowded inn might find it, stitched into the cloth itself, retrievable only by the person who put it there. A small, practical piece of tailoring, the kind of quiet good sense that never makes it into songs about pilgrimage, but that got a great many pilgrims safely from one end of a very long road to the other. Now widen the view a little, because the road under your feet has a shape and a history worth knowing, even if you have never thought about it in quite these terms. People today call it the Via Francigena, and it is tempting to imagine that as a name carved into a milestone somewhere, pointing the way like a modern road sign. It was never that tidy. In its own time, it went by several names, depending on who was describing it and why. A king's road in one document, the count's public road in another, and in places simply the road of pilgrims and merchants, which may be the most honest description of all, since those two groups made up so much of its traffic. The word Francigena itself, meaning roughly the road that comes from the land of the Franks, turns up in writing astonishingly early for something still shaping hiking maps 1,000 years later. A parchment from the year 876, kept at an abbey on Monte Amiata in Tuscany, records a boundary running alongside what it calls a strata francigena, a Frankish road, meaning simply that this was the route by which travelers arrived from the north, from Francia. That single mention, more than a century before Sigeric ever set foot on this road, is among the earliest times anyone wrote the name down at all. And it was never one road, singular. It was closer to a braid, a bundle of related paths running the same general direction, merging and splitting according to season, flood, local politics, or which lord's territory a traveler preferred to avoid that year. Long stretches followed roads the Romans had built, roads that carried legions and governors centuries before any pilgrim walked them, because Roman engineers had already solved the hardest problem this landscape poses to any road: how to get away through the mountains at all. Nobody after them saw much reason to solve it twice. The pass waiting above this valley tonight had its Roman road finished under the Emperor Claudius not long after the middle of the 1st century, complete with a staging post at the very top, so that everything you are about to see on this journey follows a route already old by the time it was ever called a pilgrim's road. Other stretches were newer, worn in by the abbeys and market towns that had grown up specifically to serve travelers, offering a bed, a meal, a place to leave a mule overnight, in exchange for a fee that kept a small town in a valley like this one fed through the winter months. But there is one particular reason we can speak about this road tonight with any real confidence about where it went and how long it took to travel, and his name was Sigeric. Sigeric, known to later writers as Sigeric the Serious, was Archbishop of Canterbury at the far northern end of this same road, in England. In the year 990, more than a century before your journey tonight, Sigeric travelled all the way to Rome to receive his pallium, the woolen band that marked him as Archbishop, an honour that in this period could only be granted in person by the Pope. He met Pope John XV, visited the great churches of Rome, and then turned north again for the long walk home. Somewhere in his travelling party was a person, unnamed in any surviving record, whose task was to keep track of where the group stopped each night. Not a diary of feelings or adventures, nothing so personal, just a list, a place name, then the next place name, then the next, each one a day's walk from the last, all the way from Rome back to the post, where a ship would carry the party across the water to England. When it was finished, that list held 79 of these overnight stages. It survives still, that list, on 2 pages of a single manuscript now kept in London at the British Library, bound in, among other unrelated texts, written in the plain, abbreviated Latin of a working document rather than a treasured one. Nobody involved in setting it down could have imagined it would still be read 1,000 years later, and that, of all things, is exactly why it matters so much. It was not written to impress anyone or to be remembered. It is simply a record of a real journey, stage by stage, and because of that, it lets us trace with real confidence roughly where a traveller walked between Rome and the English Channel in the closing years of the 10th century. 2 of those 79 stages sit almost exactly where you are walking tonight. Sigeric's list names a stop he called Publiae, then one he called Aosta, in this same valley, and then a third, higher up, close under the mountain itself, that he wrote as St. Remi, a place known today as Saint Remi, the last true village before the climb turned serious. 79 nights, roughly 20 kilometers apart on average, some stages longer, some shorter, depending on the ground, strung together into a road that ran for the better part of 2,000 kilometers between Canterbury and Rome. That is the true measure of this whole road, not one grand highway, but 79 ordinary decisions about where it was reasonable to stop walking for the day and find a roof. You are not retracing Sigeric's exact footsteps tonight, not precisely. More than a century separates you from him, and the road has shifted a little in that time, as roads always do. But you are walking the same valley, toward the same gap in the mountains, guided by the same accumulated good sense, generations of travelers, each learning a little from the ones before them about where the ground holds firm, where a village will take in a stranger overnight, where the frost settles worst on a north-facing bend. That inherited knowledge is worth more on a road like this than any map, because no map of this crossing exists yet, not one a pilgrim on foot would ever carry or consult. Ahead of you, the valley is already beginning to narrow. The stone farmhouses grow sparser as you go, set closer against the hillside, as though leaning in against something. Somewhere beyond the next bend, the road will start, gently at first, to climb. But that is still ahead of you. Tonight, here, the light is nearly gone. The amber has faded to a soft grey blue, and the road beneath your feet is still easy, still valley road, still warm enough in memory with the day's sun held a little while longer in the stones. You walk on, unhurried, because there is a village not far ahead where you intend to stop for the night, and because there is nowhere else just now that you need to be. Morning finds you already on the road, the valley you rested in falling away below as the path climbs along its northern flank. Aosta lies behind you now, its rooftops small in the haze, and the way ahead runs along terraces where vines and walnut trees have been trained against the slope for longer than anyone here can say. The stone walls that hold the terraces in place built up course by hands long since gone. The valley is narrowing. You feel it before you see it. The light arrives later and leaves earlier. The sides of the world drawing closer together, hills becoming ridges, becoming something closer to walls. Within an hour, the vines give out. Within 2, so do the walnuts. This is the shape of the day ahead of you, a long climb, measured not so much in miles as in what stops growing. Other travelers share the road with you this morning, some overtaking on mules, some falling behind on foot, and for a while you walk in the loose, shifting company of people bound the same way, breath showing white, sticks tapping the stones underfoot in a rhythm that has nothing urgent in it. Among them are merchants with pack trains bound for the fairs on the far side, a cleric or two traveling on church business that will not wait for spring, and pilgrims like yourself, carrying the same plain staff and the same small purse sewn into a cloak that every traveler on this road carries, whatever tongue they happen to speak. Winter does not close this road so much as thin it. The traffic across these mountains is a matter of trade and obligation as much as devotion, and both keep moving whatever the season, because a merchant's contract and a bishop's summons care no more for snow than your own vow does. The first village you pass through, Etrouble, has been a stopping point since long before your journey, since the Roman garrisons that once wintered here on their way to and from the northern provinces. Little of that soldiering shows now. What you see is a cluster of stone houses, low doors, roofs weighted with slabs of the same grey stone that makes up the mountains around them, smoke rising straight in air still enough this early. There is a small market here, too, of a kind, a place where travelers on this road have long been able to buy bread, cheese, a length of rope, whatever the next stretch might call for, run by people who have made a living out of exactly that need. A few of them are about now, feeding animals, drawing water, and they look at you and your fellow travelers with the particular unhurried attention of people who have watched pilgrims pass their whole lives and expect to watch a good many more. The walls here are thick, the windows narrow, everything about the building built for keeping warmth in and weather out rather than for looking well from the road. And already you can feel how different this is from the houses of gentler country lower down the valley. Beyond Etrouble, the villages come closer together and grow smaller. Saint-Oyen, then Saint Leonard, hamlets really, a chapel, a scatter of barns and houses set wherever a level shelf of ground allows it. It is here, in this stretch of the valley, that you begin to understand how a road across ground like this stays open at all. It is not simply left to itself. The villages along it have, over generations, taken on a kind of duty toward it, keeping it clear, keeping it walkable, and going out into the weather when it turns bad enough that a traveler might not get through alone. The men who do this work, some on foot, some leading a mule loaded with baskets and coiled rope, are known here as marronniers. It is not quite a trade and not quite an office. It sits somewhere between the two, a living earned and a duty owed in the same gesture, one that has grown up because a road across mountains cannot survive on travelers' goodwill by itself. In exchange for their labor on the road and their readiness to go out when called, they hold certain rights here that other villagers do not: to carry goods for pay, to guide whoever asks it of them, to be the ones this stretch of road belongs to in all but name. It is an arrangement that suits everyone involved. The counts who hold this land want the pass kept open, since tolls and trade both depend on it. The villagers want a living that does not depend entirely on what a short growing season can wring from thin mountain soil. And the traveler, you among them, wants simply to arrive, which is the one thing this whole arrangement exists to make possible. You will meet marronniers properly before the day is out, for now you pass their houses, their mules stabled and resting for the season's work, and press on. By early afternoon, you reach the last of the villages, a place the road books and the pilgrim itineraries call Saint-Rémy, set into a fold of the mountain at a height where the growing season is short and hard won. An English archbishop who made this same crossing more than a century before you, keeping a written note of every stage of his road home from Rome, recorded this same village under its old name, one halt among the many he set down. That list still exists, and it is, in its way, why anyone now can say with confidence that this road, this particular chain of stopping places, was already old and known and used by the time you walk it. It was here, in the century before your crossing, that the counts who rule this land from Savoy granted the people of the village something close to a monopoly. Theirs alone the right and the duty to guide travelers and carry their goods the last stretch up toward the pass. It is an arrangement that suits everyone involved. The counts who hold this land want the pass kept open, since tolls and trade both depend on it. The villagers want a living that does not depend entirely on what a short growing season can wring from thin mountain soil. And the traveler, you among them, wants simply to arrive, which is the one thing this whole arrangement exists to make possible. You will meet marronniers properly before the day is out, for now you pass their houses, their mules stabled and resting for the season's work, and press on. By early afternoon, you reach the last of the villages, a place the road books and the pilgrim itineraries call Saint-Rémy, set into a fold of the mountain at a height where the growing season is short and hard won. An English archbishop who made this same crossing more than a century before you, keeping a written note of every stage of his road home from Rome, recorded this same village under its old name, one halt among the many he set down. That list still exists, and it is, in its way, why anyone now can say with confidence that this road, this particular chain of stopping places, was already old and known and used by the time you walk it. It was here, in the century before your crossing, that the counts who rule this land from Savoy granted the people of the village something close to a monopoly. Theirs alone the right and the duty to guide travelers and carry their goods the last stretch up toward the pass. It is an arrangement that suits everyone involved. The counts who hold this land want the pass kept open, since tolls and trade both depend on it. The villagers want a living that does not depend entirely on what a short growing season can wring from thin mountain soil. And the traveler, you among them, wants simply to arrive, which is the one thing this whole arrangement exists to make possible.
Saint-Rémy is the last of the houses. Above it there is no more settled ground, no more fields, none of the ordinary business of living that has kept you company since Aosta. You notice it in small things. Hams and shoulders of salted, wind-dried meat hung under the eaves against the coming winter. Firewood stacked higher than a person against every south-facing wall. A woman at a doorway with the particular economy of movement of someone who treats cold as a fact of daily life rather than an event to dread. Travelers pause here to fill what they carry: bread, a little cured meat, whatever the next stretch of the day will not provide, because nothing above this point will offer it again until the hospice fire is lit. You are not the only party gathered here. Other pilgrims and merchants, who took different roads out of different valleys, converged on this same last village, as they must, since there is only the one way over from here, and for a short while the narrow street holds a small confusion of tongues, French and the local Franco-Provençal spoken thick and fast, a merchant's Italian, a word or two of something you cannot place at all, everyone bound for the same high ground, regardless of what they call home. This is what a last village looks like. It has spent generations arranging itself around the knowledge of what lies just above it. The road itself changes character too, though it takes a little longer to notice. In stretches it is unmistakably old, a paved way laid down when this pass mattered enough to an empire that its engineers cut and set stone across the harder ground, stone that has outlasted every traveller who has walked on it since. In other stretches it is simply a track, packed earth and scree, kept clear by the same hands that keep the villages fed. Here and there, a low shelter of dry stacked stone stands just off the road, roofless now, or nearly so, built for no grander purpose than breaking the wind for whoever needs a moment out of it. Along the higher sections, tall poles stand at intervals on either side of the way, cut fresh each year from the forest below, and driven into the ground before the first real snow. Their purpose is plain once it is pointed out to you. When a storm is thick enough that the road disappears beneath the snow and the eye has nothing else to hold on to, the poles remain, a line of marks leading the traveller's gaze and feet from one to the next. It is not an elegant solution. It works, and it has worked for longer than anyone walking this road today was alive to see it begin. The marronniers cut the poles themselves from the same forest you are about to climb into, carry them up on their own backs or their mules, and set them before the first heavy fall each year, a piece of maintenance as unremarkable to them as mending a roof, and about as necessary.
The forest above Saint-Remy is different from the forest below it. The broad-leaved trees, chestnut, walnut, ash, have been left behind with the last of the fields, and what climbs the slopes now is conifer, spruce first, then higher larch, its needles pale and soft against the darker green below, thinning to single trees standing well apart from one another, as if the mountain has begun to ration them. Higher still, the trees stop being trees in any way you would recognize from the valley, gnarled and low, bent by wind rather than grown by choice, until they stop altogether, and the ground opens into rough pasture, grazed close by summer flocks long since driven down to the valley, the grass gone the color of old rope. Beyond that there is only rock, and already at this hour patches of old snow lying in hollows the sun never quite reaches. The quiet up here has a different quality to it too, not the quiet of a room, but the quiet of a place with very little in it to make a sound, no bird song to speak of, no beasts, none of the small running water that fills the valley below, only the wind moving over stone and the sound of your own party's feet and breath. You might expect, looking out at all this, some rising sense of grandeur, the kind that later travelers on this same road will fill pages describing. It does not come, and it would not have come to anyone walking here beside you. The people of this century do not think mountains beautiful. A mountain to your fellow travelers is an obstacle wearing the shape of the land, something standing between here and Rome, to be got past with as much care and as little delay as possible, not admired, but managed, its heights noted only for what they cost in effort and time. The admiring of high places for their own sake, the notion that a view like this one is worth seeking out and lingering over, belongs to a much later age than yours, one that has not yet arrived and cannot be imagined from where you stand. Here the height simply means the air is thinner and colder than it was this morning, that the light off the old snow is sharper than it should be, that the legs work harder for the same stretch of ground. That is noted, quietly, filed away as a fact worth minding, and the walking continues. Nobody among your companions stops to look back at the valley falling away behind them, or up at the ridges closing in ahead, not because there is nothing to see, but because looking is not what this stretch of road is for. The change in the weather when it comes arrives as a series of small adjustments rather than any single moment. The sky, blue and hard over Aosta this morning, has softened into something grayer and lower, the ridge lines that were sharp an hour ago now blurring at their edges. The wind that was at your back on the valley floor now meets you from ahead, carrying a bite that has nothing to do with the hour of day. Somewhere above the last stand of larch, the ground underfoot changes from packed earth to something that gives slightly and holds the print of a boot. Snow, not deep, not yet, but enough to slow the pace of everyone on the road and turn walking into a more deliberate business, a matter of choosing where the foot goes rather than simply going. Conversation among your fellow travelers thins along with the visibility, not from worry, but from the plain fact that breath is better spent on walking than on talk. Cloud has begun to sit on the higher ground ahead, not the dramatic kind that rolls and boils, just a grey thickening of the air that swallows first the farthest ridge, then the nearer one, drawing the visible world in closer around your party, a little at a time.
The cold, when you pause long enough to notice, is manageable, wrapped as you are in wool cloak and hood, a scarf or cloth wound close about the throat, hands tucked wherever they can be kept from the wind. It is a fact to be managed rather than a fear to be carried, and the travellers around you, most of whom have made a crossing like this before, treat it exactly that way. A shift in conditions met with an extra fold of cloth, a slower breath, a firmer grip on the staff that has carried you this far already. Nothing more dramatic than that. Someone near you pulls a second pair of woolen hose over the first. Someone else simply walks a little closer to the person ahead, sharing the work of breaking a path through ground that has begun in patches to hide the road beneath it. It is a practical, unhurried kind of adjusting, the sort people make when they trust that the ground they are walking is known ground, watched over by people who know it better than they do. It is into this thickening weather that the Moroniers come down to meet you. You see them before you hear them, dark shapes resolving out of the grey ahead, 2 or 3 men with staffs, and, in weather like this, a mule or 2 carrying baskets and coiled rope. They know this stretch of road the way you know the streets of the town you grew up in, every rise and turn of it learned through years of walking it in whatever season it offers. They do not hurry, and their unhurriedness is itself a kind of reassurance, the calm of people for whom this weather is simply the day's weather, nothing that has not been managed 1,000 times before by them or their fathers before them. Their cloaks are heavier than most, their boots built for exactly this kind of ground, and there is nothing about the way they move that suggests they are doing anything more remarkable than a morning's ordinary work. They fall in with your party without much ceremony, a nod, a few words in the local speech that not everyone on the road understands, but that everyone reads correctly as welcome. The pace of the group settles into something new, steadier and surer of itself, following a line up the whitening ground that only the Moroniers can fully read. One of them walks ahead, testing the drifted patches with the butt of his staff before letting the mule step onto them, an easy, practiced motion, repeated so often it barely counts in his mind as caution at all. Another falls back to walk alongside the slower members of your party, not speaking much, simply present, the kind of presence that changes how a strange road feels underfoot. Somewhere beyond the next rise, the weather has folded from view. The roofs you are walking toward wait out of sight, though you cannot see them yet, and will not for some hours more. The poles keep appearing out of the grey ahead, one after another, each one confirming that the last one was rightly trusted. For now there is only the climbing, the Maroniers a few steps ahead, the snow deepening slowly underfoot, and the road, marked and kept and walked for longer than memory holds, carrying you upward into the cloud. The Maronier stops talking somewhere in this last stretch, and by now you no longer expect him to start again. He has walked this exact ground more times than he could count if you asked him to, in every temper this mountain keeps in reserve, and there is nothing left up here that needs describing out loud. He simply leans a half step into a wind that has begun to smell of snow rather than only carry it, and after a while, without turning his head, he lifts one arm toward a shape ahead in the grey.
For a while yet, there is only the wind to listen to, and it has stopped being a thing to be measured or worried about somewhere down the slope, the way it might have been this morning. Up here, it is simply weather, doing what weather at this height always does at this hour, and your part in it now is only to keep walking and let the marronnier find the ground for both of you. Snow comes at you sideways rather than down, fine and dry, more like sand than like wet snow of the valley, and it does not so much fall as travel, the whole white world of it moving past you in one direction, as if the mountain itself were being slowly poured somewhere out of sight. At first there is nothing you would call a building, a darker patch in a dark whiteness, low and long, the kind of shadow a rock might throw if a rock could be that shape. Then a window comes out of it, one window, with a small unsteady orange light behind it, the kind that a fire makes rather than the kind that only sits there. And once you have seen that one light, the rest of the building seems to gather itself around it, wall by wall, roofline by roofline, until what stood in the storm as a rumor a minute ago is now plainly a house. You have been climbing since before it was properly light. For most of that time, the mountain has offered you nothing to look forward to except more of the mountain. Now there is a door and smoke somewhere behind it, and the wind is a thing you are about to leave outside rather than a thing you are still inside of. If any picture comes to you now of a great shaggy dog bounding out through the snow to meet you, a little wooden barrel of brandy swinging from its collar, set it down gently and leave it at the door with everything else you won't need tonight. No dog waits for you here. The animals this house will become famous for are still the better part of 600 years off, and the barrel around the neck was never worn by any of them. A painter invented it, long after, for a picture people liked better than the plain truth. Tonight, the only thing coming to meet you out of the weather is a man in a good wool cloak, holding a lantern low against the wind, walking out from that one lit window because he heard or guessed that someone was still on the track. Even in these last few dozen paces, you can see the house has been built by people who know exactly what this place intends to do to them several times a year for months on end. It does not reach upward the way a fine house lower down might. It sits low and square and almost apologetic about its height, because height only gives a mountain wind something new to take hold of. The walls are stone the whole way up, thicker than the span of both your arms, laid in courses that look less built than grown, as though the mountain itself had simply been persuaded to stand up straight in one particular spot and hold still. The windows are set deep and small, more slit than opening, admitting light without inviting weather to follow it in. The roof is pitched hard and plain, built to shed rather than to hold, so the snow does what snow does and keeps moving, instead of settling into a weight the timbers underneath would have to argue with all winter.
This house stands higher than almost anywhere else people have chosen on purpose to live. The ground under it sits a shade above 2,400 meters, 8,000 feet by the other reckoning, higher than most travelers on this road, or any road, will ever stand in their lives without meaning to. Summer arrives late here and leaves early, a handful of grudging weeks squeezed between two long winters that nearly meet in the middle. Nothing grows tall enough to burn. Little grows at all beyond lichen on bare rock and a short, unimpressed grass that gets a few weeks to make its case before the weather takes the ground back. A house cannot simply live off ground like this the way a farm 2,000 meters lower can live off its own fields. Everything this house needs to survive a winter this long has to be decided on and gathered and stored long before the winter arrives to ask whether the decision was good enough. People have been finding their way over this exact call for longer than anyone at this door could tell you with any precision. Long enough that by the time the Romans held this ground, they already had a name for the crossing and a small shrine at the top of it, and travelers going up from the Italian side made their offerings there for a safe passage down the other. That much is old ground, and none of it is why you are being met at this door tonight. What changed here in the middle years of the century now finishing was that a churchman from the valley behind you decided the crossing deserved something sturdier than a shrine and a traveler's luck. His name was Bernard, an archdeacon down in Aosta, a man of standing in the church there, and he looked at a pass that had been losing travelers to it for as long as anyone kept any kind of record, and resolved that the mountain needed a household living permanently on top of it, not a shelter a traveler might or might not happen to find still standing. What Bernard built was not a chapel with a spare room tacked on for the odd guest. It was a religious community in its own right, bound to a rule, the same way any house of canons anywhere is bound to one, except that this rule has to be kept at an altitude and in a climate that makes the ordinary demands of that life look almost gentle by comparison. The men who will greet you inside tonight are the same kind of men Bernard gathered around himself at the start, canons living under the rule of Augustine, holding to the same round of prayer any house of canons keeps, sung here at a height where a full breath is its own small labor, in a building where half the discipline of the life is simply keeping the rest of the discipline possible at all. There is no great crowd of them. A house this remote is kept by a small number of men and whatever servants and guides the work requires, no more than that, because feeding and warming any larger household through a winter this long would defeat the whole purpose of the place. What discipline asks of them here is less about austerity for its own sake, the way it might be for canons living somewhere gentler, and more about simple reliability, the hours of prayer kept whether the wind allows for comfort or not, because the alternative to keeping them is letting the rule slip, and once a rule like this starts slipping at the top of a mountain, nobody is coming up to remind you of it. Word of the house travels a long way beyond this valley all the same.
An Icelander will come this way himself within a few decades, an abbot named Nicolaus, and when he writes down his own road to Rome afterward, the way another Englishman wrote his down going the other direction 130 years before this night, this house and this crossing will be sitting right there in his account, named and known, the same as they are named and known to you, now, walking up to the door. And it is the door itself, more than the stone, or the rule, or the founder's name, that travelers on this road actually talk about, valley to valley, in the way word travels ahead of a good thing. Whoever comes is taken in, not whoever can pay. Nobody inside will ask you for a coin, tonight or on any night, because charging for shelter was never the arrangement Bernard set down here, and it is not the arrangement his canons keep now. Not whoever shares the canon's own faith either, though most who cross here do. A merchant out of Byzantium keeping his own quiet accounts with heaven. A Jewish trader moving between cities on business that is entirely his own. Someone whose own parish back home would rather not claim him. None of it gets asked about at this threshold, in this wind. The only question this house puts to a traveler, in the end, is whether the mountain has just handed it to it. And it has, and that is the whole of what is required. It is worth sitting with how unusual that really is, even now, even among religious houses built exactly for this kind of work. Other hospices along other roads, and there are others, keep some version of a ledger just the same as any inn does, a fee expected somewhere down the line, a rank noted and remembered, a faith quietly checked before the fire is properly offered. This house keeps none of that. It is exactly why the marronnier came out looking for you in the weather in the first place, instead of simply telling you which direction to walk and trusting you to manage the rest, because he already knew there was a door up here that would open for you regardless of anything about you at all, and his own work only makes sense in light of that certainty. None of that generosity comes free, whatever the canons choose not to charge for it. Standing in the last of the wind before you are shown inside, notice what an achievement the house itself represents, quite apart from its welcome. Nothing up here feeds it. Every log that will go on tonight's fire, every loaf, every jar of wine arrived from somewhere a long way below, on somebody's back or a mule's, carried up one long track that meet at this door. One climbing from the Italian side, from the valley you left behind you this morning, the other coming up from the far side, from the Rhone valley on the way to Martigny. Grain, salted meat, oil. Most of all, because wood is the one thing this house can never make for itself and can never have enough of. Nothing at this height grows thick enough to feed a hearth, so every stick that burns here tonight has already made its own long climb, months or years ahead of yours. Below the rooms where you will eat and sleep, cellars have been cut back into the rock itself, cold enough all year round to need no ice brought in to help them. And it is down there that the house keeps what a whole winter's worth of strangers will need before the tracks open again. Grain in sacks stacked well off the stone floor, wine in cask, meat salted hard and hung, cheese down from the last of the summer grazing lower on the mountain. None of it is stocked for a week or a month. It is stocked for a season that will not let anyone add to it once it properly closes, which means every reckoning of how much bread and wine and salt meat this house will need has to be made in late summer by guesswork and long habit for people who have not yet arrived and cannot yet be counted.
The house pays for all that climbing with the canon's own labor and the mule's own backs.
In the years since Bernard's time, kings and popes and quietly grateful travelers who made it down off this mountain in one piece have given the house land and rents and a scattering of small dependent priories in valleys you will never see, income that exists for one purpose only, to keep this one remote roof supplied through a winter it could never survive on what the mountain itself is willing to provide. A house like this is not a shelter that simply happened to appear where it was needed. It is the far end of a long chain of giving that runs a long way back down into the valleys on both sides and reaches out quietly into other people's land altogether. How many the house can hold on any given night changes with the night itself. In the deep, quiet middle of winter, when even the marronniers judge it not worth the risk to go looking, there might be only a handful of you gathered at this door before dark. In the busier weeks either side of it, when the road is still crowded with people trying to beat the snow down or up, the hall inside fills shoulder to shoulder with strangers, floor space given up to whoever needs it, and the canons simply find room for one more traveler, and then one more again, because turning anyone back out into that weather has never once been a decision this house is prepared to make. Not every traveler who sets out for this door arrives at it, and the canons know that better than anyone. They have made their peace with it in the plainest way there is, a small stone building set apart from the rest, cold by design rather than accident, where the mountain's own climate quietly does what needs doing for the few the weather did not spare. Nobody mentions it to you tonight. There is no reason anyone should. It simply stands there, off to one side of the yard, one more part of how a house this high has learned to live with the ground underneath it. Then the door itself, and it is heavier than any door you have gone through today, iron-strapped, built to be shut hard against weather rather than opened easily against it. The canon who swings it back for you does it with the unhurried economy of a man who has done exactly this for exactly this reason more times tonight than he would trouble himself to count. Warmth comes out to meet you before you are even properly through, not a wall of heat, nothing so sudden, just air that has plainly been indoors a good while, touched with wood smoke and tallow and the damp wool smell of everyone who came in ahead of you this evening. He asks your name, and where you have come from, and where the road still means to carry you, in that order, in a voice pitched for a room rather than for a mountainside, and it takes you a moment to remember how to answer at that volume after so many hours of wind. He does not ask what you carry, he does not ask what you believe, or what you can offer in exchange for the roof over you tonight. He simply notes what the house needs to note, the way any household keeps some account of who is sleeping under its own roof, and then he steps aside to let you properly in. Behind him the passage runs on into the building, stone underfoot, a little uneven, worn smooth down the middle where several thousand pairs of feet before yours have taken the same few steps in the same direction, year on year, storm on storm. Somewhere further in, a door opens and briefly lets out the sound of other voices and the particular warm smell of a fire being fed and fed again. The marronnier is already gone, back out into the last of the light to see if anyone else is still on the track, or through to whatever room is kept for men who do that work, and you do not see him leave.
You are inside. The wind has become a thing happening to the building now, rather than a thing happening to you, and for the first time since well before dawn this morning, that fact alone is enough. The fire is the first thing you feel, before you have even taken in the shape of the room around it. Heat on your shins, heat climbing your knees. The cold you have carried all day off the pass does not leave you all at once. It retreats slowly, from your chest outward, so that your hands and feet are the last of you to believe you are safe. Someone has taken your outer cloak already. You did not quite notice them do it. That is how this house works. Hands appear, do what is needed, and withdraw again, and you are left holding a cup of something warm and wondering how it got there. The room itself is low and dim and entirely made of stone and old timber, a single great hearth at one end throwing most of the light there is. Benches run along the walls, worn pale, where generations of travelers have set their hands on the wood to lower themselves down. Rushes or old straw soften the floor underfoot, and the air carries wood smoke, tallow, wet wool, and under all of it the faint sourness of 100 years of travelers passing through the same four walls and leaving a little of themselves behind. Nothing here is built for show. Every stone of it, this far above the last tree, was raised for one purpose only, and the room does not pretend otherwise. You sit because your legs choose to sit before you decide to. The bench is hard. You do not care. After a day of wind that had no patience for you at all, hardness that holds still is its own kind of comfort. Circulation returns to your fingers in its own unhurried way, a prickling you feel more than watch, spreading up from the nails. Somewhere close, a log settles and throws up a small storm of sparks that die before they reach the rafters. You watch them go. Your shoulders, which you had not noticed climbing toward your ears all afternoon, begin at last to drop back to where they belong. For the first time since the valley this morning, there is nothing you need to do. The mountain asked something of you all day, and now, for a while, it is asking nothing at all. Your outer layers do not stay on you long. A brother of the house or one of the servants who keeps the hospice running under the canon's direction comes round with the same quiet competence as the one who took your cloak, and within a little while your sodden wool, cloak, hood, the wrappings from your legs, is hung on pegs and low racks set close enough to the hearth to steam but not scorch. And it steams it does. The room fills gently with the smell of hot, wet sheep, lanolin and rain, and the particular must of cloth that has been rained and snowed on for days without ever quite drying between. Wool was the sensible choice for this road, and you begin to understand exactly why, watching it hang there. Linen goes cold and clammy the moment it is wet, and stays that way. Wool does not. Even soaked through, it traps warmth against the body, a property of the fiber itself, the way it crimps and holds air, even full of water. That is the plain, unglamorous reason that everyone crossing this pass in winter is dressed in it, from the poorest walking pilgrim to the merchant with mules waiting in the stable below. Cloak over tunic, hose bound tight against the cold, a hood you have not taken off in 2 days, all of it the same coarse, undyed, endlessly practical cloth, because on this road no one dresses to be admired. It is not comfortable wet. It is merely survivable wet. And on a mountain like this one, survivable is the whole of the point.
The drying racks are clearly not new to this work. The pegs are worn smooth, spaced for exactly this purpose, close enough to the fire to do their job, and no closer, because scorched wool is wool wasted, and wool is not easily replaced this high above anywhere that makes it. Someone turns your things without being asked, the outer side to the heat, then a while later the other, an unhurried domestic rhythm that has clearly been practiced on hundreds of travelers before you, and will be practiced on hundreds more once you are gone. Your feet, when the wrappings finally come free of them, feel almost unbearably light. You had forgotten feet could feel like that. Food comes before you have quite finished noticing you are dry. It is not much to look at. A loaf, dark and dense, cut into a rough heel for you. A bowl of pottage, thick with peas or beans, and whatever else the kitchen had to hand, a little fat from salted meat, giving it more savor than its ingredients alone would suggest. A heel of hard cheese, made from milk that never comes from any animal wintering at this altitude, brought up already pressed and kept from some lower pasture. A cup of wine, thin and sharp, carried up. You are told this, or you have already come to know it, the way travelers on this road pick up such things, from the terraced vineyards of the valley you left behind this morning, where the vines have been climbing the hillsides since the Romans planted them, some of the highest ground in this part of the world that anyone has ever thought to plant at all. You eat slowly, because your body has forgotten how to do anything quickly tonight, and because there is for once no reason to hurry. There is something strange about it, if you let yourself think about it at all. A house standing at this height, above the last stunted trees, above anywhere a plough could ever turn a furrow, still puts bread and wine and a hot bowl in front of every stranger who reaches its door. Nothing here is grown here. Every grain of it, the flour, the dried peas, the salt in the meat, the wine itself, has come up the mountain on a mule's back, carried by men paid or persuaded to make that climb again and again, and stored through the short months when the road is passable against the long months when it is not. The hospice keeps its own stores, its own bake ovens, whatever livestock the thin summer pasture nearby will support. What cannot be grown or grazed this high is carried, and what is carried has to last, so the storerooms below this hall are packed tight and carefully by autumn, well before the first hard snow closes the mule tracks for good. None of it is generous by the standards of a lowland table. All of it up here is close to a small miracle of logistics, quietly managed by people who have been doing this since before your grandfather's grandfather was born. And it costs you nothing. This is the part travelers on this road remark most on when they remark on anything at all. No one has asked what you carry, or what you believe, or whether you can pay for what you are eating. The rule the canons of this house keep is a plain one: hospitality freely given to any traveler who reaches the door, regardless of purse or faith or station. And it is not sentiment. It is simply how the house understands its purpose. Other religious houses down in the valleys keep guest registers and rations recorded much like this one: a loaf, a bowl, a cup, set down for whoever comes, because the giving of it is itself a kind of prayer.
You are not the only one eating. The hall, once your eyes adjust past the fire's glare, turns out to hold perhaps 20 or 30 souls tonight, scattered along the benches in loose clusters that have formed however chance and shared language threw them together. There are pilgrims like you, some with the weathered look of people well into a long journey, others visibly on their first hard crossing and still slightly stunned by it. There are merchants, you can pick them out by their better cloth and their air of long practice at being cold, men who cross this pass regularly with pack mules loaded below in the stable, carrying wool cloth or salt or spices one direction and returning with something else the other. Men for whom this house is just another fixture of doing business, nothing more remarkable than a milestone on a route they know by heart. There are clergy among the benches too, a monk or two traveling on an errand for his house, a priest with the look of someone who has crossed this way more than once, and at least one messenger, recognizable by the leanness of his baggage and the speed with which he eats,
a man carrying letters rather than goods, for whom every hour spent here is an hour he will have to make up somewhere further down the road. A pair of women travel with one of the pilgrim groups, wives or widows making the journey in company for safety, as is the sensible way to do it. Pilgrimage on this road has never been a road walked by men alone. None of these people chose each other's company. The past chose it for them, the way weather and geography have always sorted travelers into whoever happens to need the same shelter on the same night. What strikes you, listening, before you fully understand what you are hearing, is how many different tongues are moving through this one small room. A pair of merchants near the door are speaking something closer to the valley's own speech, the Franco-Provençal of this Alpine country, neither quite the French of the north, nor the Latin-born speech of Italy, but something of its own, shaped by the mountains it grew up in. Two pilgrims further along sound as though they have come from northern France, or perhaps from England, their French carrying an accent the locals clearly find as foreign as you might. A knot of travelers near the fire trade words in a German you cannot follow at all, come south from beyond the high passes for business or devotion of their own. Nearer the far bench, someone answers a question in the softer, more open-voweled speech of the Italian side, the country the pass is about to deliver you into, whether you understand a word of it yet or not. And beneath and across all of it runs Latin, spoken low and easily among the clergy, and reached for by everyone else the moment plainer speech fails them, because it is the one tongue every literate traveler on this road has been taught to fall back on, however roughly. It should not work, this many languages folded into one room with no common ground beneath most of them, and yet it does mostly, because no one here is trying to conduct business or settle an argument. A cup passed to a stranger needs no translation. A nod toward the last of a loaf, an offered space on a bench, a gesture at the fire that means nothing more than sit closer, these carry further than words would anyway. Travelers who cannot manage 3 sentences of each other's speech somehow manage a whole evening of company, piecing meaning together out of a shared handful of Latin tags, a few words of trade French that seem to travel everywhere, and a great deal of patient goodwill. There have been little books made for exactly this problem for centuries now, phrase lists, the essential words for bread and shelter and the road ahead, set down for pilgrims heading through country whose speech they do not share, because this particular difficulty is as old as the road itself.
There is something particular, too, about how strangers behave with each other on a night like this one. No one here expects to see any of the others again. You apart in the morning, most of you down opposite sides of the mountain, and whatever kindness or company passes between you tonight has no future to answer to and no past to live up to. It makes people, oddly, easier with one another than they might be at home. A merchant shares wine with a pilgrim who could never repay him. A monk mends a stranger's strap without being asked twice. There is a kind of honesty available to people who both know, without saying it, that this is the whole of their acquaintance. One warm room, one night, and then the road takes them apart again. As the meal settles, the room's energy turns from talk toward small, quiet work, the sort of mending that a day's walking makes necessary and a night's rest makes possible. Someone near you works a bone needle through a torn bootstrap by the light of the fire and a low tallow lamp, squinting at the stitch. A merchant a few benches over runs a thumbnail along a notched tally stick, keeping his accounts the old plain way, murmuring numbers to himself in a tongue you do not know. A pilgrim checks, discreetly, the little weight sewn into the hem of his coat, a coin or two, kept there rather than in a scrip that could be lost or cut away,
the way careful travelers on this road have always carried what little money they dare bring. One of the women mends a companion's torn hood with quick, practical stitches, the needle catching the firelight each time it turns. Along the wall, a row of pilgrim staves lean together, each taller than its owner, each fitted with the hook that lets a man hang a gourd or a small pack from it and free both hands for the climbing, each blessed at some church door far behind them before this journey ever began. Someone else works wax into the seam of his scrip, the leather satchel that has carried his bread and his few possessions all this way, making it fit to carry them a while longer. None of it is urgent work. That is rather the point of it. These are the small, patient repairs that a person puts off during the hard hours of the road, and only attends to once the body has stopped asking for anything else. A needle drawn slowly, a strap re-threaded, a sole checked for the wear that will matter again tomorrow. The lamp gutters low and is not troubled to be trimmed. Hands move without much looking at what they do, the way hands do work they have done 100 times before on 100 other evenings like this one, in other rooms, on other roads. Talk goes on around the mending, but it thins as the evening does, the way conversation always thins once bellies are full and bones have finally warmed through. Someone tells, half in one language and half in gesture, a short account of the day's crossing, and someone else laughs at the part that needs no translating at all. A story about a worse crossing years back gets started and loses half its listeners to yawning before it finishes. Somewhere beyond the walls, faint enough that you could mistake it for imagination, the canon's house keeps its own quiet rhythm of prayer moving through the night, a sound that reaches the hall only as the barest suggestion of voices through stone, there and then gone. One by one, heads begin to nod. A pilgrim who was mending a strap sets it down half-finished, needle still through the leather, and does not pick it up again. The merchant's tally stick goes quiet in its owner's hand. Someone banks the fire lower, not out, only banked, the practical, unthinking gesture of a house that has done this every night for longer than anyone in the room has been alive. Voices that were low become lower still, then trail into a silence that is not empty, only tired, full of breathing, full of the fire's small settling sounds, full of 20 or 30 strangers who spoke half a dozen tongues between them an hour ago and now need none of them at all. Your own eyelids have grown heavier than you meant to let them. Somewhere near you, a bench creaks as someone rises, slow and careful not to wake a neighbor who has already drifted off sitting upright. The room does not go dark. It simply goes quiet, the way a place does when everyone in it has, without quite agreeing to it, decided that talking can wait until tomorrow and sleep cannot. The room has gone quiet now, the particular quiet of a house settling rather than a house empty. Around you, one by one, the shapes on the floor stop shifting. A coif, a blanket pulled higher. Someone murmurs a last word to a companion and gets no answer because the companion is already gone under. You are lying on a pallet stuffed with straw, laid over a wooden frame or straight on the swept stone, and the straw gives a little under your weight and holds the warmth you bring to it. A blanket of coarse local wool covers you, heavier than anything you own at home, the kind of weight that feels less like cloth than like a hand set flat on your chest. Above you, the ceiling is plain, rough timber, close beams you could touch if you stood, and the small, deep windows set into walls this thick were shuttered and barred before the meal was even finished.
There is no lamp left burning in here now, nothing but the last grey suggestion of the corridor light through the gap under the door, and bodies laid close along the floor, the way they are laid close in every hospice on this road tonight, not for want of room so much as for the simple animal fact that a room full of sleeping people holds its heat better than a room with one person alone in the middle of it. You have not undressed. Almost no one here has. Most travelers on this road sleep in the clothes they walked in, boots set aside, but tunic and hose and whatever wool they can add still on the body, because warmth tonight is not a thing to give away. The room holds you shoulder to shoulder with strangers you shared bread with an hour ago and will likely never see again after tomorrow. A merchant's clerk from somewhere near Lyon, two brothers walking together and arguing about nothing in particular, a woman traveling with a small painted box she has not once let out of arm's reach. None of you chose each other. All of you are, for tonight, housed the same way, fed the same soup, given the same blanket. That is the whole point of the place you are in, though nobody in the room is thinking about it now. They are only thinking about sleep, the way you are. The fire that warmed the hall below has been banked down for the night, and what heat still reaches this room comes up through the stone itself, dulled and even, nothing like the leaping warmth of an hour ago, but enough. Enough is the standard here. Nobody expects more than enough, and by the standard of where you have been today, enough feels like luxury.
Outside, the storm that has been building all evening has arrived properly, and you can hear it now the way you could not while there was still talk and firelight to cover it. It does not come at the walls the way wind comes at a farmhouse or a town gate. It comes at these walls the way weather comes at a ship, from every side and without let-up, a steady, enormous pressure rather than a series of gusts. Snow ticks against the shutters in handfuls, dry as sand, and somewhere above you a loose piece of something, a shingle or a fitting, works itself back and forth with a small complaining note that never quite becomes a bang. Under it all, low and continuous, the wind finds every seam in the roof and hums through it, a sound with almost no variation, more like breathing than like weather. Near the far wall, where the stone has had all evening to give its heat back to the outside air, your breath would show if there were light enough to see it by. It does not matter. That cold belongs to the wall, not to you, and the 2 feet of space between the two of you might as well be a country border. You are not afraid of it. That is worth noticing, because it is not the obvious response to the noise a mountain makes at night. The reason you are not afraid is that the wall beside your shoulder is stone, thick enough that you could not put your whole arm through it, built by people who understood exactly what this room would need to survive, and built it that way on purpose. Whatever the storm is doing out there, it is doing it to a building that has already had this argument with winter many times before and has always won. You lie inside that certainty, rather than outside it. The storm is a sound you are permitted to enjoy, the way a child is permitted to enjoy rain once the roof over her has proved itself. Let it work. It has nothing here that belongs to it. Sleep comes, and for a while there is nothing, the particular nothing of the first deep hours, no dreams you could report if you were woken and asked. Then, somewhere past the middle of the night, at an hour with no clock to name it, you surface, not fully, not enough to open your eyes, or even to know for certain that you have woken, rather than simply drifted into a shallower current of the same sleep. What has reached you is sound, coming from a part of the building you have not seen, a rhythm of voices, low, several together, rising and falling in a pattern that is not talk and not song exactly either, something between the two, worn smooth by long repetition.
It comes to you filtered through stone and distance until it is barely more than a texture in the dark, a kind of murmur with shape to it. Somewhere along the corridor, a line of candlelight moves once past a gap under a door and is gone. There is no fumbling in it, no complaint. Whoever is carrying that light has done this so 100 times that the body finds its way to the stairs before the mind is properly awake, the way your own feet would find a familiar road in the dark without you having to think about each step.
Those are the canons, up while everyone else in this house is down. This is their night office, the one prayer of the day said not at dawn or noon or dusk, but in the very middle of the dark, when the temptation to skip it would be strongest, and the discipline of keeping it is therefore, to their thinking, worth the most. Every religious house on this road keeps some version of the same round, hours marked through the day like the spokes of a wheel, morning and midday prayer each in its place, and then this one, the hardest one, set deliberately against the body's own wish to stay asleep. It is not new to this house, and it is not particular to it. Back at Canterbury, the monks of Sigeric's own cathedral keep something like it, and so does every abbey and priory and canon's house between here and Rome, all of them running roughly the same clock through the same night, though none of them can hear each other doing it. The reasoning behind it, if you asked one of the brothers walking the corridor above you right now, would not sound strange to him at all. Scripture gives him his instruction plainly enough. At midnight I will rise to give thanks, says the psalm, and a house that has taken vows to live by such words does not treat that particular line as decoration. The thinking runs that prayer offered only in daylight is prayer offered only when it costs nothing, when the body is willing and the world is watching. Prayer offered at the hour when a warm bed is a few steps away and nobody would ever know if you simply did not get up for it, is prayer that means something more, precisely because it was hard to give. So the office is set here, in the dead of the night, precisely for its difficulty. The idea runs further than this one house. Across the whole of the Latin Church in this century, monks and canons alike measure the day out into a string of separate prayers, one for early morning, one for midday, one for evening, and so on round the clock, following the Psalm's own claim to have praised God 7 times in a day. 7 is not meant literally so much as it is meant completely, the way a person might say they thought of someone all day long and mean it without having counted the hours. A house that takes vows to keep that rhythm cannot simply let the night pass unmarked, because an unmarked night would be the one gap in an otherwise unbroken circle, and the whole discipline depends on there being no gap. A house of God, in this understanding, should not go quiet even while its guests do. Someone, somewhere in it, ought always to be awake and saying so. You will not remember afterwards whether you truly heard this or dreamed it, and it will not matter which. Either way, the sound is not the kind that alarms. It settles into the room the way water finds the low places in a floor, without violence, and it becomes, before very long, simply one more part of the dark you are lying in, no different in effect from the storm outside or the breathing of the people around you. It says, someone is keeping watch. You are allowed to stop.
Think for a moment, before sleep pulls you back under, about what a full year looks like from this room. What you are living through tonight is not a single bad evening squeezed between 2 ordinary ones. It is the ordinary condition of this place for most of the year it keeps. The road below this pass is a road for perhaps 4 months out of 12,
from early summer to the first hard cold, and for all the rest of it, the way over is closed to anything on wheels, and passable, when it is passable at all, only on foot and only with help. Snow can stand around these walls to a depth greater than a tall man laid flat 3 times over, drift on drift through a whole season with barely a thaw between them. And the little lake just below the hospice, the one that in a warmer month you might have knelt beside to drink, lies frozen for the better part of the year, by most reckonings well over 250 days out of the 365. There is a rhythm to it that the canons and the guides both know by heart, and that no traveller passing through once, as you are, could ever learn. A short, violent summer for repairs and for laying in stores against everything that is coming, then the slow closing of the road behind the last caravans of autumn, then months in which this house is an island that happens to be made of stone rather than surrounded by water, reachable only by people willing to walk out into weather to fetch you in. Everything you ate tonight, every log burning downstairs, was carried up and set by before the snow made carrying anything up impossible. The house does not improvise its winter. It prepares for it, for months, the way a ship's crew provisions for a crossing they know will not let them stop part way. Grain, wine, salted meat, firewood cut and stacked high against the north wall, all of it carried up while the mules could still climb, because once the real snow settles in, there will be weeks together when nothing at all comes up from the valley. The same guides who met your party on the way up, the ones who know this ground the way you know the streets of your own town, do not stop working once the last caravan of the season has passed through. They go out through the whole of the winter that follows, whenever a bell or a shout from below tells them someone is caught out in weather on the wrong side of good sense, walking into exactly the storm you can hear tonight, because that is the work they were hired for, and the work they will keep doing until the road opens again in early summer. And under all of it, under this house, under the very floor this pallet rests on, the ground has been a road for far longer than anyone in this room could reckon by memory alone. The stone you are lying above tonight was crossed by people who did not know the name Bernard, did not know the word pilgrim in the sense you would use it, and prayed to somebody else entirely at the top of this pass. The Romans who came this way called the mountain Mons Jovis, the mountain of Jupiter, and at its very summit, on the flattest ground up there, they kept a temple to a god they named Jupiter Poninus, Jupiter merged with whatever older power the local people already honored on that height before any Roman ever set foot on it, as if the newcomers had looked at a place plainly sacred to somebody and decided the safest course was simply to agree.
We are not guessing at this. Clergy and later excavators digging into that summit ground over the centuries have brought up the evidence themselves. Coins by the handful, worn smooth by the same cold that will not have changed much since, and bronze plaques left as formal thanks to the god of the pass. Read what survives of them, and you are reading the same relief you might feel tomorrow morning, only in Latin and 1,000 years older. Pro itu et reditu, some of them say, for the journey there and the journey back. Pro salute, say others, for being kept safe. Soldiers left them, officers and ordinary men both, men whose names meant nothing outside their own legion. So did travelers with no rank at all to record, a courier who carried letters over this exact ground, a trader in the business of buying and selling other human beings, leaving his plaque of thanks beside everyone else's, as if the mountain judged no one's gratitude more valid than another's. Whatever these people believed, whatever god or gods they thought was listening, the shape of the prayer has not moved an inch in 11 centuries. Get me over, get me home. Note that I am grateful I was allowed to come down again. The Romans were careful record keepers on this crossing as everywhere else they went, and they wrote the pass into their own road books under a name of its own, Summus Poeninus, the summit of the Poeninus. It sat on their lists the same plain way a stage of Sigeric's own itinerary would sit on his centuries later, a name and a height and nothing more, one point among many on a line of travel that mattered enough to somebody official to be written down at all. Long before any archbishop wrote down his own long list of knights from Canterbury to Rome, this exact crossing already had its place in somebody else's ledger. You will most likely hear this mountain named tonight, if it is named at all in the talk around you, not as Bernard's Pass, but as Mont Dieu, and that name is not some coincidence of sound. It is the old Roman name, worn down by 1100 years of mouths saying it in a hurry, still doing its job of pointing at this exact height of ground. This house has carried its founder's name only since the middle of the last century, a blink of an eye by the standard of the ground it stands on. The mountain itself had a name and a god, and travelers crossing it in fear and coming down the other side to leave something behind in thanks for a very long time before that. You are simply the latest of them, wrapped in wool, on a night no different in its bones than 10,000 nights before it. The office ends somewhere beyond your hearing, though you could not say exactly when. The candlelight along the corridor withdraws to wherever the canons keep their own narrow beds. The storm has not eased at all, and does not need to. It is doing its work on stone that has already answered it for 900 winters, and will go on answering it long after this particular gust has spent itself somewhere over the ridge to the south. Your own breathing slows to match the room's. Somewhere near you, the woman with the small box has stopped holding it quite so tightly, her hand gone loose in sleep. The brothers have stopped arguing. Even the loose shingle above seems to have found its rest, or you have simply stopped hearing it, which amounts to the same thing from where you lie. There is nothing left to attend to. The mountain is doing what mountains do in winter, has always done it, will go on doing it whether or not anyone is awake to notice. And for now the only task left to you, the only task anyone in this room has left tonight, is to let the dark keep doing its work on you, the way the walls let it keep doing its work on the storm outside. Hold nothing. Let the last of the wind's low note carry you the rest of the way down.
Somewhere in the small hours the office ends, and the stone is quiet again, and you sleep the last real sleep of the night without knowing it is the last. When you wake next, it is not to a bell, it is to a paleness at the shutter's edge, grey rather than black, and to the sound of someone near you drawing on a second stocking with the unhurried care of a person who has done this every winter morning of a long life. The dormitory is stirring the way a room stirs when nobody wants to be the one to break the quiet first. A cough, the scrape of a pack being drawn along a bench. Somewhere below, felt more than heard, the canons are already about their own early office, their voices too far off to carry words, just a shape of sound moving through the building, the way warmth moves through a wall. You dress in the cold with fingers that remember from yesterday exactly how many movements it takes. Nobody speaks much. There is nothing urgent in it. You simply get up because the night is over, and because outside, for the first time in 2 days, the wind has stopped. That absence of wind is the thing you notice first when the door is finally opened and the cold outer air comes in flat and enormous and still. All through yesterday's climb and all through the night, the wind had been a fact of the place, a sound you stopped hearing only because it never stopped.
Now it has gone, and the silence it leaves behind has a texture to it, a kind of held breath. Someone near the doorway says something short in a language you don't share, and from the tone alone you understand it as wonder, or as thanks, or perhaps both, since up here the two are not always kept apart. You step out onto packed snow that squeaks rather than crunches, the sound of very cold snow underfoot. And above you the sky is doing the thing it does at this hour, at this height. Not yet blue, not quite gray, a color with no good word attached to it, brightening from the east in a line so clean it looks drawn. This is the summit ground itself, the flat shelf at the top of the pass where the hospice sits, and by daylight, even this thin, early, colorless daylight, it is a smaller place than the night made it feel. A cluster of stone buildings, walls thick as a man's forearm is long, roofs pitched steep against the weight of snow they must carry most of the year. To one side, a stretch of ground you are told is a small lake in summer, now simply more snow, indistinguishable from the rest of the white, but for a faint saucer-shaped dip that gives it away to anyone who has been told to look. The pass stands higher than any of the other great crossings of these mountains, high enough that snow can fall here in any month, and the air itself feels different in your chest than it did 2 days ago in the valley. Thinner, colder, cleaner, asking a little more of every breath than you are used to giving. You are further than anywhere than you have been at any other point on this road, and the strange thing is how ordinary that has come to feel after a night indoors with a fire and a full stomach and a floor of strangers breathing near you in the dark.
It is a smaller place, but it is not, on this particular kind of ground, only a medieval place, and the canons who run it have never claimed it as only theirs. The gap-toothed stones you can see poking through drifted snow near the buildings, half buried, worn smooth on their upper faces by weather rather than feet, are older than the hospice by the better part of 1,000 years. This col was crossed by people going the same way you are going long before there was a chapel here, long before there was a Bernard of Menthon to found one. The Romans who built and maintained a road over this pass called the mountain Mons Jovis, the mountain of Jupiter, and at its highest point, on this very shelf where you now stand, shifting your weight against the cold, they raised a temple to a version of that god fused with a local Alpine spirit the Romans called Poeninus, a compound deity for a compound danger, the god of high passes and of getting safely down the other side. We do not have to guess at this. Diggers working this ground in later centuries, long after your own time, though you have no way of knowing that, turned up coins by the 100 and small bronze plaques, offerings left by travelers, giving thanks in the plainest and most practical terms for having survived the crossing. Some name the god outright, some simply mark a debt paid. It is the oldest form of what every traveler on this pass has always been doing in one way or another, leaving something behind, in gratitude, at the one point on the road where the danger is undeniable and the relief of having got through it wants somewhere to go. The temple itself is long gone, its stones scattered or buried or worked into later walls the way old buildings on a hard site so often are, so that little of it stands to be seen by anyone walking past. But the ground remembers what the eye alone would miss, and everything since, the chapel, the guest hall, the fire that dried your clothes, sits on a place that has been marked as a crossing worth marking for 2,000 years, by two religions that never met and would not have recognized each other's reasons, but agreed across all that distance on the one plain fact that a traveler who reaches this shelf alive has something to be grateful for. You do not linger over the view the way a later visitor to this place will. No one around you is remarking on the beauty of it, the clean geometry of ridge against sky, the way the light is beginning to catch the highest snow first and work its way down like water filling a basin in reverse. That kind of looking, the kind that finds mountains lovely rather than merely survivable, belongs to a taste that has not been invented yet and will not be for a long while. Centuries in which people will start traveling to places like this on purpose, to be moved by them, to paint them, to call them sublime. For now, the mountain is a fact to be got past, respected the way you respect a river in flood or a winter at sea. And the highest praise anyone here would think to give this shelf of ground is that this morning, unlike so many mornings, it is letting you leave.
There is a little time yet before the road divides you from the people you shared last night's fire and this morning's bread with, and it passes in the unhurried business of packing and blessing and small farewells that don't pretend to be more than they are. The prior, or whichever canon has stepped out to see the household of travelers off, says something over the group as a whole rather than to each in turn, a short form of words wishing safe travel and asking it of God for all of you together, regardless of which of your homes or tongues or reasons for being here differ from the next person's. It is the same rule that took you in without asking your faith the evening before, working forward now into the morning. Hospitality that doesn't end at the door, only changes shape. One of the men who knows this ground in every season walks the first stretch with your group. The house keeps a handful of such men on retainer through the winter months, local to these slopes and paid for exactly this work, going out into weather that would keep anyone else indoors, reading a drift or a change in the light the way you might read a face, and bringing in whoever they find caught by it. Today the sky needs nothing from him, but he comes anyway, because the habit of watching over this stretch of road doesn't switch off simply because the weather has turned kind. And then, a little further on, without any particular ceremony, the parting happens. The merchant, bound further into Italy, peels off at his own pace, walking a touch faster than the rest of you, the pace of a man with accounts to settle somewhere. The older traveler, who prayed longest last night, lags a little behind, moving carefully on the packed snow, in no hurry at all. Someone you never learned a common language with lifts a hand to you as the path begins its first real turn downward, and you lift yours back, and that is the whole of the goodbye. No promise to write, no plan to meet again, because none of you expect to, and because the road itself has already told you, since the valley, that this is how it works. You gather people for a night or a stretch of days, and then the road divides you again. And it is not sad exactly, only true. The ordinary truth of travel in a world where a letter takes weeks and a return journey may never happen at all. What you keep is smaller and stranger than an address, the shape of a face by firelight, a few words of another tongue, the memory of someone else's relief matching your own when the door of the hospice first opened onto warmth. The descent begins in the same white the summit wore, snow underfoot and snow banked on either side of the track. But it does not stay that way for long, and this is the part of the crossing your legs will thank you for, even while your knees complain of the new work of going down rather than up. The gradient does what gradients do on the Italian side of this pass, dropping faster than the climb out of the Aosta valley had risen, so that height falls away under you almost before you are ready to notice it happening. An hour along, the snow has thinned to patches between grey rock rather than an unbroken sheet. A little further, and the first trees appear, larch first, spare and dark, then pine, holding their needles through the winter in a way that makes them look, after 2 days of nothing but rock and snow and stone, almost extravagantly alive. You are walking out of one season and down into an earlier one, as though the mountain kept a different calendar at every height, and every hour of descent turns its pages back a little further toward fall. By midday, the valley has properly opened beneath you, and it is worth pausing on the path just to look at what a whole day's climbing had hidden. Slopes that were sheer white wall from below are from up here seen to be terraced and worked, the faint lines of fields and orchards visible even under a dusting of lower country snow, because people have been making a living out of this ground for a very long time, and were doing so long before the road you are walking existed. Somewhere down there, waiting at the valley floor, is a town the Romans built as a garrison and a gateway when they first pushed a road over this pass in the time of the first emperor. A planned town, walled and gridded the Roman way, the same builders who raised the temple you passed this morning at the summit. It is a strange thing to carry both of those facts down the mountain together. The ruin at the top and the living town at the bottom, both older than the hospice, both put there for the same reason you are walking this road at all, because a pass, once someone finds a way over it, becomes something people keep using. Centuries from now, long after this particular winter and this particular crossing have been forgotten by everyone who lived through them, this same house at the summit will keep a line of large, patient dogs, bred to go out into exactly the weather you crossed in 2 days ago, trained to find travelers the storms have got the better of. And a painter, further on again, will put a small barrel around one of those dogs' necks for the sake of a good picture, and the picture will be so well loved that people will come to believe the barrel was always there, part of the animal's working kit, rather than an artist's invention. None of that exists yet. There is no dog waiting at this door this morning, no barrel, only the guide who has already turned back up toward the hospice, and the plain, unglamorous, centuries-older fact underneath the story that will eventually replace it in most people's minds, that a house on this exact spot, run by exactly this kind of quiet, unpaid vigilance, has been doing the actual work of finding people and bringing them in since long before any dog was bred for the purpose. This road you are walking down is older than your own crossing of it by a long stretch, and it has been written down before. More than a century before this particular winter, an Archbishop of Canterbury, traveling home from Rome, had a clerk of his set down every stage of the journey, evening by evening, all the way to the coast, a plain list of stopping places, this pass among them, that has outlasted the man who made it and every companion who walked it with him. You will never read that list yourself, but the road under your feet this morning is the same road it describes, worn a little deeper by everyone who has checked their own day's walking against it since.
Because that, in the end, is the thing worth carrying down the mountain with you, more than any view or any ruin. The hospice you slept in last night, the fire you dried your clothes at, the soup and bread that came without a price named for it, that house is still there. Not the idea of it, not a ruin of it, the same order of canons under a rule that has not changed its central promise is receiving travelers at that same summit tonight, and will be tomorrow, and has been for something close to 900 years without a real interruption, which makes it, by most reckonings, the oldest continuously running house of its kind anywhere in these mountains. Popes have come and gone below it. Kingdoms that ruled this valley when the hospice was founded have been redrawn a dozen times since. Armies have crossed this same col in both directions in weather far worse than yours. And still, every winter, someone is watching for travelers from that doorway, and still the door opens without asking first who you are or what you believe, exactly as it opened for you.
That continuity is the real marvel of the place. Not the temple under the snow, not the coins in the ground, but a promise of shelter kept by strangers for 9 centuries and counting, on the coldest and highest ground any road in these mountains dares to cross. The valley keeps widening as you go, the road easier under your feet with every mile. Voices of the people still near you, turning quieter and more contented, the way voices do when a hard thing is finally, truly behind them, rather than merely paused. Rome is still many weeks off, but the pass, the part of this whole road that every pilgrim from Canterbury has feared most and prepared for longest, is behind you now, done, survived, already beginning to soften at the edges into the kind of story you will tell, rather than the thing you are still living through. And perhaps that is not so different from where you are now, listening, warm, wherever you happen to be, as you, perhaps, are sleeping now, the day already receding the way the summit recedes behind a traveler heading into gentler country. So let go of the last of it, whatever you are still holding. Sleep well, and when you are ready to travel again, Nox Historia will be waiting. Good night.